think we're clear. Welcome to a special episode of What Is This Weapon? Hello and welcome back to What Is This Weapon? And yeah, it is a bit of a special episode. We're going to get round to this sooner or later, and here it is. This is our original screen-used Aliens and Alien³ M-41A Pulse Rifle. I should have done the scare quotes over Pulse Rifle for reasons I'll explain later on in terms of the lore of how this thing is supposed to work. But it's fictional designation M-41A, already a bit of a departure from current US military nomenclature, but recognisably that's what that was. So that's what it's referred to. I guess its nickname is Pulse Rifle. We'll come back to the whole Pulse Rifle thing in a bit. But so my history with the Pulse Rifle, well, goes back to being a child, really. Watching Aliens with my dad the first time on TV, I think it was. And instantly falling in love with it, as a lot of us, I think. A lot of us probably have similar stories about encountering that amazing piece of cinema. 1986, James Cameron directed, obviously the sequel to Ridley Scott's Alien, quite a pivot to the whole war movie vibe from the sort of haunted house in space, as they say, of Alien, where in the final cut of that film, there basically aren't any weapons that can do anything. In theory, there are laser weapons in that movie that they kind of glossed over, and they sort of explain that away as, we can't penetrate this thing's skin or it will burn a hole in the ship and we will die. And that's a trope that has stayed with the franchise ever since.
Molecular acid.
You must be using it for blood.
It's got a wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it.
Albeit sometimes makes more sense than others. So we didn't really get much military hardware in the first movie, the famous white flamethrower being the main thing, the grappling hook, I guess, which makes a cameo at the beginning of Aliens as well. So amazing for I guess I was 12 or 13, something like that when I first saw it, but exactly what you want to see when you're a young lad is a bunch of space soldiers shooting aliens. Came to appreciate the other entries, or certainly the first movie, and to a lesser extent Alien³ later on, perhaps a bit more cerebral. But you can't beat a load of speculative future military hardware, and of course that's well in our ballpark here at the Armouries. So in 2015, I ran into two of these. So there was one with the original aluminium, or aluminum if you prefer, casing or shroud that really does the heavy lifting with this piece of movie prop design. It hides the Thompson submachine gun that's the basic weapon in here, and it breaks up the lines as well, a bit of the SPAS-12 shotgun casing, heat shield, and cut-off grip here. This is a chunk of SPAS-12 grip. And it just does a great job of pulling us together into a real sci-fi design. But yes, the one I got my hands on first of all was at Prop Store, our friends at Prop Store in London. And that was great. I've got a cheesy photo of me with that somewhere. I think it's my Google profile pic, although I look rather young in it now. Actually, sorry, that was a little bit before. So that would have been 2013. So by 2015, I was out in LA visiting Prop Store LA. And this was in Brandon Allinger. Hello, Brandon, if you're watching. In his office at that time, but for sale. And I remember thinking, I wonder, with this project that we had underway at the time, collecting cultures, Heritage Lottery funded, could we maybe get together the cash to acquire a Pulse Rifle from a personal favourite of mine? I go back and forth, but it's one of my top 3 sci-fi films of all time. Probably one of my top 3 films of all time, actually. But not just me. So I wasn't just out to collect stuff that I thought was interesting. I knew that this was important for a lot of other people and a way to preserve some actually quite British cinema history. Because although Aliens is an American movie, it was filmed in the UK with famously a British crew, and there's some problems there to do with unionisation as far as James Cameron was concerned. Lots of tea breaks and things that it's part of the story of the making of the movie.
You take a break for tea. Filming with the British crew meant not only a tax break,
They had a tea break.
Twice a day.
Everything stops for tea.
It's tea time, mates.
Tea time was my most favorite time ever. I absolutely loved it. I know not everybody did.
yes, James Cameron didn't like tea.
But what a movie they ended up making. You've got so many iconic bits of kit in there. The Colonial Marines armour, even their sidearms, I think, are a great choice by Simon Atherton, the armourer at Bapty, who's responsible for making this. The smart gun, of course, but for me, it was always about the pulse rifle, that amazing rising, falling report that doesn't really make much sense, but sounds incredible. Lots of firing from the hip at the time, which was the style at the time. Not really using any sights. There's just a groove in the top of this casing, this shroud here. I guess it's implied there's some kind of sighting system there. There's also sighting kind of built into the helmets, which are just M1 steel helmets, but dressed up. And the armour constructed by Terry English. Very fortunate to have met and spoken to both Terry and Simon Atherton, the armourer. So we did end up acquiring that for the National Collection, the only one in an accredited museum, I guess. Quite proud of that. Clearly, a lot of people who come to the Armouries are here for the antique stuff. I love all of it, and that includes the more contemporary collection. So there isn't perhaps as much on this to show you as you might think. It is sadly deactivated. So aside from a few things we got direct from Bapty & Co, and therefore we could have them live, anything that comes out of the movie industry for sale is deactivated. So there's no firing of this going to go on. It was originally built as a firing pulse rifle, one of, I think, 7 to have been made with firing Thompson guns in them, and only one ever had the over and under pump action, and I won't pump it because this is literally held on with by its own friction, and every time you operate that, you're slightly wearing the paint finish. So, and it does not connect it to any mechanism, doesn't do anything. But in the movie, this was this concept of, in reality, a Remington 870 shotgun inside the SPAS-12 casing, and you see one notable scene where Ripley is tooling up, I think maybe second only, and it's debatable, suiting up scenes between Commando with Arnold and Sigourney in the elevator getting psyched up to fight the alien queen. And I think in terms of sort of emotional impact, her scene takes it, because you can see she's steeling herself to do something that is, appropriately enough, pretty alien to her. She's not a warrior, but she's having to be one. One of the major themes of the movie, motherhood and protecting things that she cares about. Really, such a great film on so many levels, just the action, but the sort of subtext. You've got that going on, you've got the Vietnam War allegory going on, which is definitely there. There's an academic, at least one book that goes into this, and that's reflected in the kit. So, brief segue into that. So this whole configuration of a compact automatic weapon with this shape of carrying handle, a sliding stock, and an underbarrel grenade launcher that sort of pumps open, well, this does pump open, is, in my eyes, and I haven't interviewed James Cameron, but it's a sort of future extrapolation of something like the XM177 Commando, Colt Commando, with a 203 grenade launcher, or perhaps more likely an XM148 grenade launcher under barrel. A fairly rare configuration in Vietnam, but it did exist. And that gives you a similar firepower combination. And clearly James Cameron, who is something of a firearms enthusiast, was taken with. And we'll come back to him being an enthusiast in terms of the pulse rifle thing as well in a moment. So you've got your under barrel launcher. Without that this thing would just wouldn't have the lines, wouldn't look right. Here's the Thompson barrel. Now, I said that this was built as a firing gun, and it was. So most of this gun was used in the filming of Aliens. Not one that we could screen match to any particular scene, unfortunately, partly because, like all of them, except the one James Cameron kept, which is the only one with the pump action intact, by the way. I believe that was the only one that was ever on set for the sort of insert pumping the grenade launcher features, and the famous scene with Hicks and Ripley where he's teaching her how to use the weapon. That's what we believe is the James Cameron gun. It has a 10-hole vent with a square feature here. You can spot it that way, and that would have been passed around whoever needed to show the grenade launcher in action. The grenades were clearly not grenades. They were shotgun snap caps to save the firing pin on a shotgun. Machine turned to look like something sci-fi with a plastic cap over the end. So you fed those up into it like shotgun shells, because they were shotgun shells effectively. So the barrel, though, on this is not a real Thompson barrel anymore. The receiver is still there. The bolt is even still there with the face cut away for deactivation. And that, incidentally, sorry, I'm leaping around a bit, I know, but I mean, this is a passion project of mine. That shows that this is in fact an M1A1 originally. So I doubt Bapty cared whether they were building pulse rifles on M1s or M1A1s, but if you've ever wondered about the ultra nerdy detail of the pulse rifles, this one at least was an M1A1. And we can tell that because although it's machined away, there's no space for a moving firing pin. This would have had a fixed firing pin, and that's functionally the only difference between an M1 and an M1A1 Thompson. Obviously, cocking handle on the side on both of those. So the fake barrel, that's intriguing. It's a piece of steel tube. It's fairly robust, but it's not the original Thompson barrel. And I suspect that goes hand in hand with this slightly creaky plastic shroud. I should turn this around so you get to see some of this. We'll pop up some B-roll for you as well. I hesitate to say beauty shots because this thing is not perhaps the top tier of what was made. You'd have to go and visit Jim Cameron for that one. Or perhaps the one I held in 2013, which had been rebuilt and restored into a metal shrouded version. But anyway, it's ours and we love it. It's a real Thompson, empty, real SPAS-12 cage, but empty. It's got a black foam in here and a sort of fake shotgun barrel that's obviously fake. I'll show you the muzzle there. And even this end cap might actually be a replacement from the same incident, which is rebuilding for Alien-3. So I think when they put this back together from bits, because they struck everything into parts, as they did with basically all of these lash-ups, like the Star Wars guns and everything else, this was done as a non-firing gun. So this might be the other of the black pulse rifles that you see at the end of Alien-3. For a long time, I was thinking that this was, or could be, the one that fires the single shot into the poor prisoner's leg at the end of that movie. I suspect not, because I think this is essentially as it came out of Bapty after Alien-3. They left them back together after Alien-3, and they appeared in things like music videos, weirdly enough. So I think this was in bits. They tack welded, or brazed actually, the shroud, this SPAS-12 assembly back onto the vent. And I'm guessing there was no barrel in the Thompson receiver at the time, so they fitted this rather thin fake barrel because this one didn't need to fire. That's my current theory. I've changed my view over the years with this thing. 10 years of staring at this on and off. More off than on, because it's on display most of the time. So a live fire gun in Aliens with a metal shroud. Never would have had a grenade launcher / shotgun in it, and then it's reassembled for Alien-3 and repainted as well. Repainted black. If you remember the end of Alien-3, they have this sort of tactical commando, Weyland-Yutani corporate commando black scheme, which is actually rather cool looking, but ruins the classic pulse rifle aesthetic. And so when Bapty got this ready to sell, they took the shroud off, presumably, and spray painted it this color, which may or may not be the correct screen color. There are lots of debates online about that. The official answer, I guess, or the consensus is that it was a brown best, Humbrol brown best modeling paint that was used. But these things, all these bits of kit, the motion tracker, the crates, the guns, all look different under different lighting. They wanted this to look like what the buyer expected it to look like. But under this is still the black paint. So, bit like a couple of historic aircraft out there that still have their original paint, this has its original Alien-3 paint. Probably not its original Aliens paint under that. We will probably never take off this paint, but it's kind of nice to know that it's under there. So in a way, more of an Alien³ pulse rifle than an Aliens pulse rifle, but at the end of the day, the receiver, almost certainly the grip, the SPAS-12, the grip, this grip, pump grip here, the sliding stock, which I won't mess with too much, but does actually slide, and there's a plate on top here that stops it coming all the way out. So in theory, you can deploy this, pull it out, shoulder it, and sight through the non-existent sights and use it properly. But they never do in the movie because it was the 80s. In terms of, you can actually see this shroud shifts a little on the receiver. I have to be a little careful. Don't want to put any more weight on that on that final paint finish than we need to. The stock, so the whole design changed a little bit. The story loosely goes that James Cameron, he's essentially a production designer in his own right, or an artist at least, and he designed the pulse rifle following a visit to Bapty. So they tried out some different weapons. They knew they wanted something short-barreled for this futuristic rifle, and they've kind of correctly predicted there that rifles wouldn't need such long barrels in the future. You look at the M4 carbine, that was a sort of compromise of, we don't need a barrel longer than that for the sort of engagement ranges that the US Army are going to fight at. So you've already got a shorter barrel there. And then even things like the SIG M7 rifle has a 13-inch barrel, but it's pushing with more advanced ammunition out to the same velocities that an M16 with a 20-inch barrel would be doing. So the idea of an underbarrel integrated grenade launcher, not ahead of its time, but those have certainly become more common since 1986. A short barrel, a sliding stock, these have become basically standard, or if not sliding, then some sort of folding stock. Cameron's original design, we'll see if we can throw up the drawing that he did, the production design. So that was after they decided on the Thompson for the sheer amount of muzzle flash that he wanted to see on film. So 45 ACP gives you a greater case capacity than something like 9mm, and therefore more flash. So they're like, right, despite this being in fairly far future, we're going to go with a World War II submachine gun, fine, but we're going to hide it with some disguises. And he did this really nice drawing, a little bit more detail than the pulse rifle ever ended up with. Sort of really nice bit of sci-fi design there. Things like the buttstock. And for years, I thought that was meant to represent an MP5 dressed up as a pulse rifle. No, it's always a Thompson. Before the drawing was made, they decided that it was going to be a Thompson. What threw me and other people off is that the buttstock design on that drawing really is very MP5. So he's borrowed that from the MP5, but the rest of it is meant to be a Thompson in a quite elaborate tuxedo, if you like. Now, as I mentioned, we don't have the original, rather crisper, nicer, less creaky and slidey around aluminium shroud. This is molded from one of those, so you get the same design, but it's a little more melty looking because that's how vacuum forming works. They vacuum formed over the original, they made something therefore fractionally bigger, and you don't get the sort of nice detail of a separate piece of U-shaped metal, for example. This should run underneath the front of the shroud, both sides, and be a separate piece to make it look like it's doing something. Here it's just molded in detail. No counter, of course, the iconic counter that seems to go up to 99 rounds. Albeit the highest we see in the movie is 95. Completely insane. They even show a 20-round Thompson magazine going in and out of the gun at one point. So there's no way you're fitting in 95 or 99 rounds. That said, some people have done some creative thinking as to how that might work, including the designer of the Alien Romulus proto-pulse rifle, who I'm very pleased to have met recently, who explains some of his thinking about that. I think also amazing piece of production design and prop building. Never intended to have that very high capacity, by the way, even more insane than what the pulse rifle got. But we gloss over that when we watch the movie because it's just that good. The original aluminium shroud, so another little bit of a British industry connection in the history of this thing and of the movie, is that was manufactured by a racing car body maker by the name of Maurice Gomme. And he worked for Lola and AC and I think other racing teams at the time. and they were using sheet metal aluminium for car racing bodies. I believe it was hammered into shape, sort of cold hammer forged really, over what they call a buck, a form that had been carved, presumably of wood, into this shape. And then you clamp that over, screw it in place with a couple of brackets to hold it in. That changes, of course, the shape of the magazine area, which is one of the most iconic features of the Thompson, is either a whacking great drum or a box magazine sticking out the bottom. Well, that helps radically change the silhouette of the weapon. Here we come to the caseless thing. So we have this described in the movie as 10mm, well, 10mm explosive tipped caseless is how it's described, but also standard light armor piercing round. There is armor piercing incendiary and armor piercing incendiary and armor piercing explosive type rounds, things like Raufoss, for example. But that's a little bit of a contradiction. Something as small as this, you're probably going to be firing an armor piercing bullet or an explosive bullet for different purposes. Anyway, we go with it. It's future technology. It does both. Caseless, well, if you're as nerdy as me, quite early on I spotted the cases flying out of the weapon. These days they'd be CGI removed, or you just wouldn't use a real gun inside your prop in the first place, probably. There are ways to do it now with a reciprocating weight, and for sci-fi stuff I'm kind of okay with that. That's how the modern Star Wars guns are done. But in universe it's a 10mm, and I guess although the barrel is not quite right for a firing gun, 45 is a big old diameter. Obviously not the same as 10mm, but in universe it's 10mm. There's all sorts of fan stuff that's been come up with since, which is great fun to speculate on. But in fact, the caseless thing was a bit of a throwaway reference. That is added to the final draft of the script, which is only a month away from actual filming. So it's an open question as to whether anyone had decided this was supposed to be a caseless weapon when it was actually designed, if you see what I mean. There's no indication of that on Cameron's drawing. He's never said anything about that. It's perfectly possible this was a normal cased ammo firing weapon until such time as he saw or remembered the word caseless as a high technology of the 1980s, things like the G11, and threw it in there as a bit of technobabble. And there is some technobabble in Aliens, including the phrase phased plasma pulse rifle. Lots of debate in the fan community about whether that's a separate weapon. That's the route the games, I think the RPG have gone. That's a separate thing. I'm of the firm opinion that this is supposed to be or was originally supposed to be a phased plasma pulse rifle. Why would you have pulse rifle and phased plasma pulse rifle? And we can speculate all day long on how it would actually work in reality. If you pressed me, I've speculated that it's some sort of electrothermal chemical propellant, would give it sort of potentially a higher muzzle velocity and maybe even explain the rising falling tone as, yeah, don't know. Highly speculative and nerdy, but on the face of it, and all it needs to do in the movie is be effective against the xenomorphs. So a couple of hits from this on a xenomorph will take them down, but then the script keeps things tense by making ammunition limited, always a great move. Doesn't do it via the reload thing, which I always enjoy in movies where character has to quickly change magazines or something. But we do get the sentry gun scene, of course, to make up for that. Anyway, I think by this point, we're pretty much agreed that this is not plasma per se. I'm just thinking that maybe some high-tech ammunition could use, well, and this technology exists, by the way, electrothermal chemical reaction, sort of replacing both a percussion primer and the propellant inside the case, or in this case, some form of caseless ammunition. But it's completely speculative and really all just a bit of fun. At the end of the day, this was part of a really interesting trend in, well, the 1980s, but kind of kicked off by Star Wars, I think, of grittier sci-fi weapons. Yes, those were still ray guns, but they were firing pulses of energy that were sort of akin to bullets in a way, almost more like tracer fire. And they were all real guns firing blanks. And you got the sense of something a bit dirtier and grittier and lived in and industrial. Aliens and Blade Runner ran with that and kind of went in a similar direction. You know, the blaster in Blade Runner is, people speculate about how that works, but some sort of projectile firing weapon, or slug thrower, you might call it. And the pulse rifle for me is the ultimate. For me, it's the ultimate sci-fi weapon, full stop. And it's the ultimate believable future firearm-like weapon. You know, it's not the Buck Rogers ray gun. It's not even the Star Wars blaster. It's something much more believable, incredibly cool looking, and it's there throughout the movie, and it's there in some of the final scenes that wrap everything up. It's much copied as well, inspired all sorts of other designs. And then we've got that modern prequel version from Romulus to round things up. I'm a bit nervous about Alien Earth, I'm not going to lie, but we won't get into that now. Very, very pleased to have this in the collection for posterity. If you're in Leeds, please come and visit it. It's displayed alongside its component parts, as it were, a Thompson, an 870, a SPAS-12, to just really ram home how this thing was conceived and put together by these geniuses. So, and shout out to the fan community, some of whom I know, and they're out there reenacting the Colonial Marines, which is awesome. So keep up the good work out there. So I have to say goodbye to this. This will be going back into its case, back into our make-believe section of the galleries. So until next time, this is Jonathan Ferguson of the Royal Armouries Museum, signing off.